Welcome to Group Y Live. I'm Ollie Russell Cowan, and I'm stoked to be joined today by Nick Tran, a marketer with a reputation for transforming brands into cultural icons. As the former global head of marketing at TikTok, he led campaigns that turned the platform from a rising app to a worldwide phenomenon, defying navigating brand challenges along the way. Tran has also held executive roles at Hulu, Samsung, Stance Socks, Taco Bell, where he developed award-winning strategies that drove growth, engagement, and resilience, steering brands to success during times of adversity. Beyond marketing, Tran's influence extends into media and entrepreneurship. He's an angel investor in consumer disruptors like Liquid Death, Away Travel, Olipop. He's recognized by Fortune and Ad Age's 40 Under 40, Adweek's Brand Genius, and Forbes' most influential CMOs. Nick's going to be talking about brand transformation, crisis leadership, and audience engagement. Let's jump into it. I'm super excited to be joined today by Nick Tran. Nick was the former CEO for TikTok, for Samsung.
CMO, not CEO.
CMO, sorry, apologies.
Yeah, I was not the CEO of anything ever.
CMO, so head of global marketing at TikTok. And Nick, welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much.
Great to have you here.
Excited to be here.
And whereabouts are you at the moment? Are you over in London? Are you at home?
I live in London, moved here a couple of years ago from LA, and have really enjoyed being abroad. So it's been a great change and a huge opportunity for the family and I just to travel and explore so much of Europe. So it's been good. And then one funny thing is I first got in touch with the Group Y maybe 12 years ago, I want to say, when I first started my career at Taco Bell. And one of the most memorable highlights was presenting at a Group Y little summit where some of the most iconic people in streetwear were all on stage. It was like from Tinker Hatfield to Bob Hurley to you name it, Bobby Hundreds. And I was able to be on stage and take a picture with all of these guys, including Mark. And it was just like one of the most memorable moments early in my career.
That's great. I mean, I'd love to kind of that sort of sets a perfect perfect segue to jump in, because you grew up in Orange County, right? And
that's right.
And how did you where did I guess the initial thought of getting a career in marketing? I mean, what was the appeal kind of growing up over there, and what were you into when you were growing up?
Yeah, growing up in Orange County was actually pretty mellow. This was before all the hype around the TV show, like the OC and all that stuff. So it was just like a quiet place, little beachside community. It did have a lot of creative inspiration, and you did have a lot of folks in the action sports, especially in the surfing community, start to pop up and have offices there. Mm-hmm. My interest didn't come until maybe after college, I'd say, because growing up, especially in a Asian, first generation immigrant family, you sort of have this expectation on what a good career looks like. And though my parents were never overly pushy to put me into any box, I kind of felt at the time I had this interest in being a doctor, and very typical thing for someone with my background to want to become. And I started from third grade until I want to say early college with this expectation of becoming a doctor one day. And it wasn't until I was taking classes at UCSD, which is in San Diego, that I realized that as much as I love the idea of helping people, and I like the idea of, science and biology and medicine and all that stuff, it just wasn't something that I was as passionate or as convicted about doing in my life. I then made this pivot to jump into a pre-law path towards the back half of my college career. Okay. And in my mind, if I was going to be a doctor, I would try to be a lawyer. And I took all the classes and took this pre-law path. I even took the LSAT, which is sort of the prerequisite test before you go into law school. I actually did well on the tests, but I spent the summer interning at a company in Long Beach in their legal department. And I was stuck in the office just reading contract after contract after contract, and asked to make little red lines and annotations and all that stuff, and realized that if a career in law meant reading a lot of documents and just sitting behind a desk without any real interaction with people, this wouldn't be the right thing for me. So it was at that moment that I first got into working with my parents in their like consulting sort of business. And
which is IT, wasn't it? Like,
yeah,
yeah.
they were in SAP consulting, which is essentially like a big, enterprise resource planning tool. And I was helping them for a few years and came across a project where on one hand, we were doing more of like the technical specifications and sort of like the back end stuff. And I was, across the table was a creative agency that was doing a lot of the design and the sort of like look and feel for this, for this website that would ultimately be something that we were working on. And I remember thinking at that moment, what would it take for me to be on that side of the table versus on this side of the table? Whereas like I was looking at technical and functional specifications, they were just dreaming up what this could look like, what the design was, how to creatively bring it to life, and how to like advertise it and get more people to use the site. And I realized at that moment that that's what I wanted to do. So I decided to go back to get my MBA and pursue a career in marketing.
And then that's kind of what led to Taco Bell. Like, didn't you start off as an intern? I've heard you say that was kind of like a PhD in marketing.
That was
starting off there and that run for a few
yes,
years.
Without a doubt. In the same way that people talk about the PayPal mafia for amazing founders in the tech space, I feel that like the Taco Bell mafia during this time of like 2010 to 2014, 15, the number of marketers who came from that group and that cohort, let's say, who've gone on to become CMOs and have like prolific marketing careers in other places is just incredible. And being able to be part of that cohort and learn from some of the best people in marketing and really get my like feet wet in an environment where I was given the freedom to do a lot of things that I thought were interesting, to have the creative freedom to try out stuff without any fear of, failing. And then to also see the fruits of our labor turn into, some of the initial playbooks for brands as a whole, not just in the fast food space, but like as a whole on how to be better at social media, sort of kickstarted my career and put me on a very different path than had I, been at a more traditional company doing the brand marketing thing. So getting into that space early on, being an intern on the social side, and having such an incredible cohort of like friends that I still have to this day be part of that journey has impacted my career in such a profound way.
And would they give you a bit of leeway in terms of, if you did have an idea or if there were certain campaigns, or was it quite structured? I mean, it's a large corporation, so it's kind of looking at that team that you were on.
Yeah, it wasn't as structured, and it's partially because two things. One, at the time when I joined, they were in the midst of having one of the worst crises that they've had for that company. It was the same time frame that they were sued. It was in 2012, where they were sued for not using real beef. And even though that's not true, they use real beef. The headlines that were kind of going around were just like Taco Bell sued for not using real beef, and it created this sort of like even though it was like a fake or like a false reinforcement, it created this like false reinforcement of what people perceived of the brand and the quality of the food to be. Mm-hmm. That really like, created this like issue that, impacted sales and traffic and all these different things. And it was in that moment that I realized that when you're in the middle of a crisis, your ability to innovate and do things differently increase exponentially, because you don't have to continue to sustain what has been doing or working well. You're given a lot of freedom and latitude to just try new things, because you're almost like no longer concerned about failing because you're in a rut. You just want to do anything to try to get yourself out. And our leadership of that at that time included some of, the best people in marketing at the top. So people like Brian Nickel, who's now the CEO of Starbucks, people like Tressie Lieberman, who's now the global chief brand officer of Starbucks. And then you had Aaron North, who ended up becoming the CMO for, Mint Mobile and Ryan Reynolds. And then, a lot of folks like Chris Brandt, who became the CMO of Chipotle. You had like so many leaders in an environment that fostered creativity, innovation, disruption, and our ability to test and learn across like a lot of stuff in the social space. So like my cohort included people that become like, heads of brand for Uber or Yahoo and Carter's. A lot of folks went to Chipotle. A lot of folks started at other fast food restaurants, including like Papa John's and Shake Shack and TGI Fridays and so on and so forth. IHOP, one of our cohort colleagues ended up becoming the president of IHOP. So like the number of folks that just had a remarkable innate talent for marketing, really like shaped my career. And another person that I just thought, like Tracy LaRocca, Jennifer Arnold, they're all now at OC in Orange County working for like the Anaheim sort of like Ducks and the whole like convention center and retail environments there. They were also like, big influences in my career early on. So I'd say like the number of people that I was able to work with at such a young stage of my career shaped me to not only have no fear at doing cool stuff, but also like gave me the experience that, that I now have that, started at Taco Bell.
And like, I mean, they were like, I guess mentoring you in a way. I mean, was it something that were you seeking it out, or was it like they would kind of just because you were in that situation that it was like right place, right time?
I think it's tough to pinpoint any one thing. I'd say definitely right place, right time, because walking into that situation, even down to the first person who hired me as an intern, her name is Ron Ali. She ended up becoming the CMO of the LA Rams. They wanted to find an approach to marketing that could help propel the company to reach a younger audience. So that was like what they wanted. And when I started working on the social media side of things, I think they recognized that that was a very easy conduit to reach a younger audience, because there was a lot of like interest in, Instagram. And then eventually when Snap came to life, that became like another area of interest. And obviously like Facebook had always sort of like been one of the staples, and then Twitter and like all these other areas. This is obviously like pre-TikTok. I think when they saw what we were able to do to innovate within those platforms, they took an interest into that area that I was working on. So immediately I was able to then, have them mentor me, but also have them rely on me to help shape the presence of the brand in those channels to help reach this new generation of folks that I was able to, really tap into. So I think it was mutual, and the best mentorship, collaborations are not one-sided. I think the best relationships I've had, both as a mentor and as a mentee, are where both sides have something to gain. We had this thing with Brian when he became CEO of Taco Bell, where we would do this reverse mentorship where it'd be either myself or some folks on the social media team. We'd literally like come into the executive leadership team meetings and for 15 to 20 minutes, just share all the new slang, all the new trends, what was happening in social, just so that they were aware of what was going on and how our customers were reacting to some of the stuff we were doing. And I think from the CFO to the COO to, the CEO, they all took a really big interest into how this world was shaping and how dynamic it was. And, they were eager to learn from us just as much as we were very eager to learn from them.
Nice. From your time at Taco Bell, it then went on to, I guess, the action sports world, where you were heading up marketing for Stance Socks. And how did that come about? Was that something that you got approached to do, or were you kind of looking?
Yeah, that's actually a fun story because while I was at Taco Bell, we were at the Irvine Spectrum, and I was working across the street from this retail shop called Salvation. And for those folks that are aware of like Irvine, Salvation ended up becoming like a Nike store basically, but it wasn't Nike proper. It was masked as sort of like this action sports shop called Salvation that had Nike SB. It had Hurley at the time when Hurley was still part of like the Nike family. And then it had, I forget the third brand, maybe it was Converse, but it basically had like brands that were in the Nike family that skewed a little bit more towards action sports. And then they would showcase like their main brands there. Before they became a little bit too like corporate Nike, that store also had other brands that weren't Nike in there. And one of those brands was Stance. So in this like forum where they were making custom, Nike shoes, I think they had like the custom Janoskis, a few other things that were happening in there. There was this one sock stand, and it was Stance. And I remember like I saw the design. I thought they were like really cool. And this was when like Stance was very small. and I bought my first pair. And the moment I put them on my feet, I realized like these were different. And I was so obsessed with the Stance brand that I remember asking the person that was making the custom shoes. We became like friends. I asked him like, what's the deal with this brand called Stance? And he's like, oh, it's actually this company that's in San Clemente, and the founders pop in this store periodically. Is it someone that you'd want to meet? And I said, like, of course, I'd like love to meet them. Though he could never like make that introduction happen, he eventually left and became an employee at Stance, and he was doing a lot of the custom sock designs at Stance. And I remember at one point I Googled the Stance phone number. I called their office, and someone picked up the phone, and I immediately said, you have no idea who I am, but like, my name is Nick. I work at Taco Bell. I love your brand. I've been buying socks every like 2 or 3 days. I buy like a new pair during my lunch break. And I'm so obsessed with your brand that if I could work for your brand for free for just like a little bit of equity, I'd be happy to do that. And the person on the other line of the phone literally said, we just got these phones installed. I have no idea what you just said, but thank you, but no thank you. And they literally just hung up on me. Didn't take my information.
Oh, really?
Literally just hung up on
Wow.
me. And then about 6 months later, I was at this conference called Patau, which is, very much like in the world of action sports as well. And it's actually where I met Mark, from Group Y. But I was at Patau, and I found out that Jeff Curl, one of the co-founders of Stance, was there. And I made it like my mission to like find him and put my self in front of him and tell him what I wanted to do and all these fun things. And I remember when I first met him, I had like maybe 2 minutes with him. He was like rushing to go to catch a flight. So he basically talked to me for 2 minutes, said thank you for being like a fan of the brand, and he literally like ran off. And I felt at that moment like, oh man, I missed my opportunity. This is such a bummer. But the next day I get a phone call on my cell phone, and it was him. And he said, I'm so sorry I had to run off to a flight, but I got someone to connect us and give me your phone number. And I just wanted to say, like, I'd love to hear more about your story, because I've been following your career for, the last few months at Taco Bell, and you've been doing some really amazing work. Would you be open to getting taking a chance and coming out down to Stance and working here? And sure enough, I told him about the story about how I called. And he said, yeah, I wish I would have gotten that phone call. I would have said yes in a heartbeat. But I started at Stance and maybe like a couple months later.
And what was that like, kind of building Stance out when it was small, and sort of taking that, I guess, sort of the action sports background of the brand and the whole kind of like the culture and the lifestyle of it, and building that out.
It was a very interesting time, because Ryan Kingman, who is another co-founder of Stance, who'd come from the world of action sports, he brought me in to help him on the marketing side. And he was one of the few folks that I think recognized that Stance was at a tipping point, and they were looking for some outside perspective and someone that did not come from the action sports world. Mm-hmm. And it was such a fun time, because I think I was one of the first hires that did not come from that world. I didn't want to work at Skull Candy. I wasn't at Element or like any of the action sports, LRG. Like, they were hiring from a lot of folks within the space. Yeah. And I came from Taco Bell, which was like as far from that world as you could imagine at the time. And I think they were so open to looking at a new approach and at bringing in some of the more structured, ways that we were doing marketing at Taco Bell, which in my mind was still like best in class, almost, the playbook for how people could be relevant in culture and bring a brand into the forefront of that new generation through social. That I think Stance was very excited to try to adapt their approach of being, very scrappy and nimble and capable to reach this niche audience and scale that to the masses. So we were working on things like a deal with Vice Sports to try to get more awareness and create these short films and documentary style things about skateboarders in Cuba. We were also doing this huge collaboration with Star Wars, and we were, bringing to life the first website where you can actually shop using the Force. And I think there was a huge appetite to do fun, creative things. We even snuck ourselves into the Super Bowl, into this like Kia Super Bowl ad where Christopher Walken is talking about not being bland, and he's using a Stance sock puppet as an analogy for like not being plain. And it was in that moment of Stance where we got so much national recognition and got a lot more awareness. And it just really felt like a fun time where work didn't feel like work. Like we were literally going to the office and hanging out and playing and doing all these different things. And it really had like a fun vibe, that I look back fondly during my career.
And it was like, I guess a sort of bit of a mix between grassroots where, you were like gifting or product seeding to influencers and celebs as well. And then kind of doing these bigger collabs, Star Wars, NBA.
Yeah, Rihanna, like all that. I'd say that with the time that I had at Stance, the thing that, Kingman and the team really taught me was how to leverage like niche communities to grow, the company and the brand, and really like catapult the way that I think about influencer marketing into like a new, realm. At Taco Bell, we were really focused on developing that relationship with social media personalities. So we did a lot with like YouTubers, especially during the early days of Taco Bell. And then we eventually started doing stuff with like folks on Vine, which was like the cursor to TikTok, I'd say. But at Stance, it was more formalized. You had a couple folks from like Clark and this guy named Svi who like knew the sports world so well and had intimate access with some of the best athletes in the world, like especially in the NBA. And seeing how we could build not just like influencer marketing, where like you mentioned like gifting and doing that, like we did a lot of that, but like creating these events, like for example, the Stance Spades tournament is without a doubt one of like my favorite events during NBA All-Star weekend. And it was incubated on this like premise that a lot of the NBA players love to play spades in their downtime. They'll do it on the plane, they'll do it at the hotels. It's just a very competitive thing that they're incredibly excited about playing. So when you create an environment where you can bring in a lot of these NBA athletes with some of the like, fun celebrities and musicians to just play spades, which is something they'd love to do anyways. And you turn that into an activation for Stance, just like a surefire home run. And it's something that I, immediately saw the value of it at a very like pivotal point when I was like crafting my sort of playbook on how to win in marketing.
And that playbook, I mean, like you mentioned it earlier on, with Taco Bell was kind of like bit of crisis mode. That happened. It's happened kind of a few other times, right? I mean, when you went into Samsung with everything that was with the phones there, and
everywhere I go ends up like having an absolute horrific crisis. And it's sort of been like the I don't know if it's like a signature of my career, but like I go to Taco Bell, stewed for not having real beef. Again, not true, but it was the thing at the time. I go to Stance, and I remember at the first maybe like couple months that I was there, some of the larger like retailers that we were selling our products wholesale to, they'd gone bankrupt. And in that moment, we had to really like double down on direct to consumer and e-com and like building up our own retail presence. So that was like a big crisis. I ended up going to Samsung because of this random phone call that I had with the CMO at Samsung at the time. And so when I ended up moving over to Samsung, one of my first launches was the Samsung Galaxy Note 7, which were the phones that were literally catching on fire.
Wow. Okay.
So, you obviously are, from one crisis to another, and it's just like the stakes are increasing. We kind of power through this whole, building back trust and building back the brand and focusing less on the product itself. And I was able to like really get back into like a big corporate environment where, the crisis allowed us to do things that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to do, and really focus on innovation and building the brand story as opposed to just telling the product story, which is what Samsung has always been known for. In that era, we were able to navigate through that crisis and actually emerge more successful than we were when we first started. So we started off that year like the 7th largest brand in the world, according to Interbrand. And after 2 recalls of the phone and a recall with the washing machines, we ended up being the 6th largest brand in the world, because I think we focused so much on telling the story of the brand, telling about how it's not just about the products, but this pursuit of innovation. And it almost allowed us to, recognize the issues with the batteries in the phone, show that we were making progress to improve upon those issues, but also that it's not about just the product, but about the spirit of the product being like one of the highest performing electronics products in the world. And if you put them in the right hands, it could be like magic. And I think that really helped propel us into becoming a more valuable brand at the end of that year in light of those crises. So I, went from there. I go to Hulu. A couple months later, we're acquired by Disney. So I ended up joining like the Disney family. And then from there, I go to TikTok, and within a few months, there's an executive order to effectively ban TikTok in the US. It ended up becoming banned in India and a couple other countries. But having this, career progression that allowed me to see crisis after crisis after crisis did two things. One, it made me no longer worry about a crisis, no matter how drastic it might be. And then two, it allowed me to recognize that if you build a foundation that's focused on the brand itself and on telling that story, you have not only a way to withstand a crisis when it happens, but you also have a launch pad to grow the company in a more stable manner, because people love brands and they love rallying around brands, even in light of a crisis, if it's a brand that they have a relationship with. Otherwise, they'll obviously just move on.
And with TikTok, that was 2020 when you started there, right in the middle of the pandemic. The whole world's kind of been flipped upside down. And I mean, was it sort of looking at this going, okay, well, there's one way of thinking about it, that people are at home, engagement, there is that in that one way of like, there is a bit of an opportunity for the brands there, but then also looking at going, that playbook that existed before, that sort of goes out the window because everything's just got to move so much faster.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of framed it up perfectly in the sense that going from crisis to crisis made me, believe, for right or for wrong, that like I had the right playbook to win with any brand. And it didn't matter what industry I was in, whether it was food and beverage or apparel or entertainment or consumer electronics. Like, I literally felt that I had the playbook on how to break a brand into culture and win. What happened at TikTok, which was very nuanced, is I was literally in the belly of the beast, if you will, and seeing that like the way that it was changing people's behaviors and the approach that people had in consuming content was shifting so quickly, and being in like the middle of that and seeing how it was all working made me immediately realize that the playbook that we used previously would not work if we applied that to the TikTok brand at that time. And in realizing that, I also saw that brands that were doing the traditional path were not gaining as much as the brands that were evolving into this like new approach to marketing. Mm-hmm. And it all stemmed from this idea of, marketing and moving at the speed of culture, which was now like required for brands to win, as opposed to the more like traditional approach of like telling the story you want to tell and like getting an insight that works for the customer and then crafting the narrative and then pitching all that and then, bringing that to market. That's no longer the approach that will win in a post TikTok era, especially with how the algorithms incentivize amazing content. And they're like not incentivizing just like paid content, so to speak. So yeah, being at TikTok was probably the easiest way for me to immediately see that marketers that don't shift their approach to marketing will no longer grow, and that they will need to adapt into this new model as quickly as they can. And the ones that are doing it are seeing a lot of success.
Yeah. And it's sort of then and now it's kind of, it is creating culture, right? I mean, and then it's sort of like, how did you keep your finger on the pulse in terms of these new things that would be happening in different subcultures and different groups and communities within the platform? Was that sort of like bringing in smart people in your team and then sort of relying on them, or like, or looking at the data, looking at analytics?
Yes, to a degree, but at the end of the day, it's taking that same approach that I learned when we first talked about my early days at Taco Bell, where we were doing these reverse mentorships. We had this standing meeting every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. Where the social team at TikTok would share with me like the most important trends that were happening on the platform and highlight different opportunities that we might be able to tap into. And having a group of passionate individuals who are on the platform at all times and, able to like bring that to life for me every week was, absolutely necessary, because I didn't necessarily have the time. Like, I might spend an hour or so on the platform, but I wouldn't be able to spend like 4 hours or whatever they were spending on the platform. Mm-hmm. So that was obviously hugely, informative. But at the same time, to your point on data, because we were the platform, we obviously had some insight into which trends were doing really well and like what creators were starting to take off, and that also helped inform a little bit of what we did. But the biggest change that I think I drove earlier on at TikTok was this idea that we can't claim to have culture start on TikTok if we can't bring to life a campaign at the speed of culture. And that meant moving this 10 to 12 week campaign cycle down to 5 days, where things that are happening are brought to life within a very tight time frame and then showcased to the world. Because if you can move at that speed, then it really is where culture starts. Otherwise, you're just following culture, which isn't bad for a lot of brands. But if you're a platform that claims to be, the heart of where culture and all these trends come from, you got to back that up with bringing it to life in a way that shows that you're on top of things in real time.
And all of that would have been done internally, I'm
Yeah.
guessing, right? Because it is you've only got a couple of days to then turn it around.
Yeah. I mean, we had a couple agencies that were supporting,
Okay.
one with the initial brand strategy for how we wanted to bring this to life. So in my mind, I came in with this idea that the same playbook that I used in the past would be the approach to moving forward, and setting up things like the brand strategy and the foundation. All that was necessary, and stuff that, I had, a great collaborator with. It's this agency called Known. And then we also, for social, I was able to collaborate with Gary Vaynerchuk, who's a powerhouse when it comes to anticipating trends, knowing things are going in culture, and then anticipating the right platforms. So he was able to, bring his team, and we basically brainstormed how TikTok could bring in, its own voice into the creative, and essentially scale that across other platforms. And in time, it was clear that for things like Project Cheetah, which is that idea of moving at the speed of culture and making things really fast paced, you can't have this dynamic of working with the agency and sending a draft and then getting a review and then making edits. You have to move in real time. So we had to have a much more nimble approach. A lot of that was done internally. We had obviously support from them where we needed it. But at the end of the day, I don't think brands today will rely as much on traditional agencies as they have in the past. I think if you have the right approach and you're taught the way to develop content, leverage the media and the PR machines that you have, that are more earned and less paid, and then create the inspiration internally to be able to just go out and make the content, I think you'll see that brands like Liquid Death, which you are intimately familiar with, will likely win in this new age, in this post-TikTok world, than a brand in a traditional CPG environment that still believes that if I buy inventory on TV media and I place my ad to tell people to go buy XYZ, it'll translate to sales. That will be a lot less effective than someone who knows how to be entertaining, drive engagement, drive loyalty, and have their content seen organically versus it being something that interrupts people in their daily lives.
Yeah. And kind of looking at that now, I've got to ask you, with sort of everything that is going on in the press and over in the States with TikTok, sort of recording this now in January with the potential ban. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that is going to be a possibility?
I mean, a couple of things are, I don't have any additional insight into that than most people at this stage. I'd say that also living in London has removed me even further from what's happening in the US. And I, feel that, again, this is the personal opinions, that it'd be fairly difficult for there to be a way for them to get out of the situation that they're in, unless the Supreme Court decides to pause it, and then we see what happens with the incoming president. But as far as the platform and what it does, you've also seen over the last year since that ban was started to get enacted, the impact, I said positively, that it has on small businesses, I think is going to be a big factor moving forward, because a lot of small businesses that are leveraging, TikTok Shop, or even leveraging the platform to drive awareness of their product or service at scale with very little, money or investment would definitely be a huge, issue for a lot of them. So I can see both sides. Like on one hand, that would be very like disastrous, but on the other hand, you have to take a lot of the things that the government found into account and think like, is it actually, private? Is it like safe? Is it all these things that they're concerned about? And like in everything in life, there's no black or white. There's always going to be this gray area, and there's going to be, credibility on both sides. So, I have close friends that are adamant that it should be, banned, and that it should be, especially like, kids under a certain age should be guarded from the platform. And I have other friends that are literally saying that their business depends on it. So I don't think there's like one right or wrong answer or approach. And as far as like what's going to happen January 19th, I think we'll all have to wait and see. And kind of like take it day by day. But I do know a lot of friends and brands that are proactively coming up with a strategy, if that does happen, how they take the audience that they had there and either like redirect them towards other platforms, or how do they just like, continue to foster the relationship they're able to have in a new way.
Yeah. And would that be the same kind of like with those brands and those friends of yours? Like, is it like the thought on AI in storytelling and like now marketing? Is there any kind of like, I guess there's a little bit of a crossover of sort of like, what are these trends going to be? What is going to happen?
Yeah. I mean, AI is certainly going to be a very interesting place for marketers. I'm not as pessimistic on the impact that it's going to have into like the marketing, the creative community. I think personally that a lot of the things that were a little bit more what's the word, like some of the tasks that used to be done that felt a little bit just cumbersome, I think AI will make a lot more efficient. And the people that were necessarily, forced to do that might have now the creative headspace to do other things. So on one hand, you'll see some aspects made either redundant or efficient with the use of AI, but that could open up more innovation because people will actually have time to think about other things than just doing, very like,
those mundane tasks and things, right?
Yeah, that's like my hope at least. And then on the flip side, I do feel that this like culling of things that are more mundane is a natural progression in all industries. I'd have just been slower to hit the, creative space. But that's just going to make the type of work we do need to be more creative and stand out even further. I, have obviously been trying to like educate myself on what the impact is with AI and how you can leverage it. And I will say confidently that a lot of the things that used to take me, several hours to do, I can now do in like a few minutes. So I see that benefit, and I'm not just sitting around doing nothing in that time that I'm saving. I'm actually thinking about more things to do and how to do things a little bit more like, interestingly, which I think hopefully will inspire a whole new wave of creativity and use cases. In the same way that social came aboard and completely disrupted the traditional media approach, AI is just going to help as a tool create a little bit more efficiency, which would hopefully allow people to spend more time thinking about fun and interactive, engaging things to do.
And then especially if it's sort of around community or building something or having that audience and then kind of just using it in those right ways. Now that you're in London, what are you up to over there?
Yeah, I've been traveling a lot. My family and I have been able to go to 20 different countries in the last 2 years.
Wow. Nice.
So I think that's been eye-opening because having the perspective, especially like a more global perspective than what I had when I was just living in the US, has really opened up my, like creativity to think about things and the nuances a little bit differently. One funny thing is just like British humor is so specific. It translates as well, but if you're living in it and you see it, there's like something there that's very, especially because there's an element of British humor that you might not understand if you're, just in the US, but that nuance also Southeast Asia. And I've grown to appreciate that a lot more. It was acquired, and a little bit of like exposure to that like luxury space was definitely fun. And at the same time, leading up to TikTok and then how I've evolved that in a post TikTok era has also allowed me to help teach a lot of friends. I'm also like spending my time catching up with friends and helping them with their companies and like rethink their marketing approach on agencies as an example, like traditional agencies. Like I genuinely feel that I could, teach folks how to them needing to be, reliant on a specific agency or group, for
that advisory work. Have you been combining that with angel investing, and has that sort of been kind of separate?
a little bit of both. Like there's some brands that I've angel invested in and like wrote a small check into, teaching on how the new approach might help them. One of my earlier investments in 2019 was Liquid Death. At each of those stages, I've just seen how they've been able to completely like transform their approach to marketing in a way that's seeing a lot of other brands who are inspired by brands like Liquid Death who want to take, some of those elements and bring like not every brand can be that edgy. Inspiring on the social platforms and leveraging that versus just relying on paid media, I think is a lesson that everyone can learn. And I consumer facing brands that I'm like very excited about, and being able to leverage my experience to help guide them has been like, because it's something like I'm almost paying them to help them. So like I'm not like necessarily like one day it would drive some kind of income. So I'm also helping bigger brands who want to take that pains and marketing the speed of culture and just like advising them where I don't have necessarily an equity stake in them. So I think both are fun and exciting, and it's ultimately, and each of these moments act as case studies, whether it's like an angel investment, whether it's a place that I've been at in my career, gives me more confidence in like the approach that I'm taking and how it can help brands succeed, so that one day I could teach a new generation of marketers how to be creative and ultimately help their brands in the future succeed, which I think would be an amazing legacy.
Out of all of those startup, whether it's a big corporation, what would be like, I guess, so one or during your career that you would pass on?
Ooh, honestly, I think there's probably a lot more than just one or two bits. As a leader, you get to a point in your career where it's no longer about having the best idea, or in your career, you want to show that you're right so that you can have credibility. Let's say, as an example, I've been able to like, move up in my career and have this realization no longer to do that. And it's to actually just inspire people to do their best work and create the best environment for them to do. That shift, happened probably during my time at like Samsung to Hulu. And my best advice for post TikTok world nobody has all the answers because things are changing so fast, and relying on the leader at the top to have all the right answers and always going to an environment where people are capable of making, calculated risks and just trying things out, and then learning that there won't be any like penalties for doing those types of things. So I think like that the first lesson is just like experiment, try to do a bunch of things, do things on your own, and don't rely on like the old playbook to tell you what the right thing to do is, because nobody truly knows. And then the second thing is in this new era of like how people are consuming content, if you don't change the way that you market, knowing that people are consuming things so differently, there's literally no way you'll win. You will eventually just lose. You might as well take that risk now and learn how to be a better marketer in today's age and make that pivot sooner than be forced to do that at a point where you're in a big crisis. And if you don't do it, it's almost game over. So I just think that like a lot of brands are going to like cling on to that old way because it's like known to them and it's
comfortable for them, right?
And all that stuff. But by the time they are forced to do it, it might be too late. And I just don't think it makes sense to wait that long, especially when the cost and the barrier to get into this new way of marketing is so low. Yeah. Like, we're not saying spend heaps of money to do this new thing. I'm literally saying spend less money, learn how to be better at creating content, learn how to use the algos to your advantage, and like almost like turn off the paid social until you can prove that you can do it well. And then you can figure out how to do it. So like that to me is a very easy proposition to say, let's test this by spending less and like showing that we can win by just being better creatives, which I think is a fun challenge for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Nice one. Nick, if people want to reach out to you or follow what you're up to, what's the best way?
Easiest might be just like LinkedIn. Yep. I've taken a lot of like put the responsibility on myself to try to post 3 to 5 times a week now. I didn't do that before, and I'm finding that there's a lot of great conversations that are happening on LinkedIn, and people are DMing me on the side, say like, hey, can I have a follow up and like discuss this further? I'm fairly open to it depending on the situation. So I'd say like the best way would just be, finding me on LinkedIn and connecting through the DMs there. So someone who I, definitely find to be like a great trend spotter, had asked me like how I've been doing things. My email, as an example, I just hit 30,000 unread emails, and my, I have an alert from Google now telling me that I have to like increase the capacity or else they're going to shut off like my Gmail and
increase the storage and stuff you mean, or
yeah, exactly. So, and I didn't realize I could hit 100 gigs of like storage, like, in that time. And I realized that like, I don't check emails. I feel like DMs, especially on LinkedIn, are almost like a new way to access people. And it also gives me like a quick insight into like context and background, because unlike email, if someone hits me up on LinkedIn through a DM, I can see where they're working, what their question is, what they're like interested in immediately, which tells me like, okay, this is probably what the conversation is going to be about.
Yeah.
And I'm like more, open to having that connection. Whereas if I get a cold email, I literally have like no idea.
Could be anyone, right?
It could be anyone, and it could be anything. So I definitely think that like the DMs and LinkedIn are going to be better than like cold emails moving forward. If someone were to create a business around, the MailChimp of LinkedIn DMs, there might be something there that could be of interest for someone to start a new platform for sure.
Nice. Cool. Yeah. Well, Nick, thanks so much for your time. Really, really interesting hearing everything about background and just your thoughts on marketing as a whole, and what's going to be coming up in the future. So it'll be great to keep in touch, and
obviously would love to keep in touch. And thank you again for inviting me. Always happy to support the community. Again, like the action sports world is where a lot of culture starts. And I think the folks that are starting in that space have like a huge advantage at how to like really be on the cusp and the cutting edge of culture, because that's literally where a lot of the trends stem from, like that world of action sports. So it's an exciting place to be.
Great. Thanks, Nick.
All right.
Cheers.